I first heard it on a quiet Wednesday night. At least I thought I did. A low, muffled sound, almost like breathing but heavier, like something large shifting just beneath the floor. I was half asleep, tangled in my sheets, the glow of my bedside lamp barely keeping the shadows at bay. I told myself it was just my imagination. Houses settle, pipes groan, the wind makes strange noises if you listen too hard. But as I rolled over and closed my eyes, the sound came again. A slow, dragging noise. Not the creak of wood or the groan of pipes. Something else. Something alive. I sat up, my breath caught in my throat. The house was dead silent, except for the faint hum of the refrigerator down the hall. I strained my ears, heart hammering against my ribs. Nothing. Maybe I dreamed it. I lay back down, staring at the ceiling, waiting. Minutes passed. Then thud. It was faint, but it came from directly below me. The crawl space. I shot upright, my skin crawling. My house didn't have a basement. Just a small, sealed-off crawl space the HOA insisted no one open. They'd even included it in the homeowner's agreement when I moved in. Do not access the crawl space beneath your home. At the time, I laughed it off as some weird HOA control freak nonsense. Maybe they didn't want people messing with the foundation. But now, sitting there in the dark, I wasn't laughing. I swung my legs over the side of the bed, planting my feet on the cold floor. The air felt heavier than before, pressing against me, thick with an unease I couldn't shake. Louder this time. I grabbed my phone and turned on the flashlight, stepping cautiously toward the floor vent near my dresser. Kneeling down, I aimed the light inside. Dust floated in the beam, but the metal slats were too narrow to see anything below. I hesitated, then pressed my ear against the vent. Silence. I held my breath. Then a whisper. A faint, shuddering exhale, like something deep below was breathing just beneath me. I scrambled back, my pulse pounding in my ears. The house suddenly felt too quiet, too still, like it was holding its breath along with me. I didn't sleep that night. The next morning, I convinced myself I'd imagined it. Lack of sleep does weird things to your brain. But by the time night fell, the dread had returned. I lay in bed, my body tense, waiting. Hours passed. Nothing. Then, just past 2 a.m., I heard it again. A long, slow scratch, like claws against wood. I bolted upright, clutching my blanket like a shield. My phone sat on the nightstand, and I reached for it with shaking fingers. The sound came again, deeper this time, as if something was trying to dig its way out. I couldn't take it anymore. I threw on my jacket, grabbed a flashlight, and headed outside. The cold night air bit at my skin as I made my way around the house to the crawlspace hatch. The HOA had sealed it with a padlock, but it was old, rusted, barely hanging on. I hesitated, fingers hovering over the lock. The rational part of my brain screamed at me to stop, to just go back inside, but I needed to know. I gripped the lock, twisting it hard, snap. The hatch creaked as I pried it open. A rush of stale, damp air hit me, carrying something else, something foul, rotting. I gagged, stepping back. My flashlight flickered as I aimed it inside. The beam barely cut through the thick darkness, illuminating wooden beams, old pipes, and dirt. Nothing moved. I exhaled, relief washing over me. Maybe I'd just been paranoid. Maybe. Then I saw it. A deep furrow in the dirt, as if something had been dragging itself through. The earth was disturbed, uneven, and the deeper I looked, the more I saw something shifting. I stumbled back, heart hammering against my ribs. The whispering sound returned, rising from the darkness, a ragged, hungry breath. I slammed the hatch shut, locking it as best I could before sprinting back inside, bolting the door behind me. I didn't sleep. Again. Morning came, and I tried to tell myself it was just my mind playing tricks. I tried to focus on work, on anything but the thing beneath my home. But by evening, the dread had settled deep in my bones. I couldn't ignore it anymore. I decided to call the HOA. The phone rang 3 times before a woman answered in a clipped, formal tone. "This is the Oak Ridge HOA. How may I assist you?" I swallowed hard. "Yeah, hi. I just had a question about the crawl space under my house." Silence. Then her voice dropped, flat and cold. Homeowners are not permitted to access the crawl space. Is there an issue? I hesitated. I think something's down there. Another silence. Longer this time. Then almost too quiet to hear. Do not go back down there. And do not open it again. A chill ran down my spine. What's buried under my house? The line went dead. I stared at the phone, my hands shaking. They knew. The HOA knew. And whatever was under my house, it wasn't supposed to be found. The phone call had left me shaken, my hands trembling as I placed the receiver down, the harsh click of the line disconnecting echoing in my ears. My heart was still pounding from the chilling warning, but the deeper, darker truth was settling in. The HOA knew something. They knew what was under my house. And whatever it was, they didn't want me to find out. I spent the next few hours pacing the floor, anxiety clawing at my chest. My phone sat on the table, its silence deafening. I wanted answers, needed answers, but every instinct screamed at me to stay away. The warning from the HOA rang in my ears, a mantra. Do not go back down there. And do not open it again. But how could I not? How could I let it go, knowing that whatever was down there, whatever had been buried beneath my feet for so long, was now alive, aware, and waiting? I couldn't. At least, that's what I kept telling myself. I went to the local library the next day, hoping to find anything that could explain the strange secrecy surrounding the crawl space. I dug through dusty archives, pulling out old property records and HOA files. Most of the documents were routine, rules about lawn care, noise levels, and community events. But one file stood out. It was a thick folder, bound with rubber bands, and labeled only with the words, Oak Ridge HOA, Historical Landmarks and Property Restrictions. I opened it cautiously, scanning through the pages until one particular section caught my eye. Special property requirements for lot number 97. My house. The document was dated in 1964, far before I'd even been born. I felt a cold sweat bead on the back of my neck as I read through the peculiar restrictions attached to my property. At first, the document seemed typical. Restrictions about building heights, fencing styles, and landscaping, but then there was a mention of a hidden feature on the lot. Lot number 97 contains a historically significant feature, the nature of which is to remain undisclosed to the public. Any digging, construction, or disturbance of the land is strictly prohibited under penalty of legal and financial consequence. I blinked, rereading the passage twice, trying to make sense of it. A hidden feature? What could it mean? I thumbed through the rest of the file, desperate for more information. Finally, at the very back, there was a set of faded photographs, each showing the same small section of my yard. The pictures were old, black and white, and seemed to depict a burial site, a group of men in suits and hats standing solemnly beside a freshly dug grave. I stared at the photo, a shiver crawling up my spine. The grave seemed too deep, too unnatural. And there was something odd about the men, almost as if they were hiding their faces or avoiding the camera's gaze. But the most disturbing part was the large stone marker beside the grave, engraved with a symbol that looked almost like a twisted, jagged tree. A cold knot formed in my stomach. I turned the page, and there it was, written in ink, the same symbol, but this time, next to the words, "This is not to be disturbed. All who attempt to unearth it will face severe consequences." I slammed the folder shut, the sound reverberating through the quiet library. My mind raced. I had to know more. What was buried beneath my house? And why did the HOA seem so determined to keep it hidden? That night, I couldn't sleep. The images from the library swirled in my head, each thought more maddening than the last. Was it really a burial site? And if it was, who had been buried there, and why? I kept thinking about the strange, suffocating air in the crawl space, the faint whispers, and the low, shuddering breaths I'd heard beneath my house. The sensation that something alive, something that shouldn't be alive, was waiting for me. At around 2 a.m., I heard it again. The scratch. It started faintly, like nails against wood, then grew louder, more frantic. I froze, unable to move, every muscle in my body locked in terror. Then I heard a new sound, a muffled voice. It was too far to make out the words, but it sounded desperate. Like someone was pleading for help. My blood ran cold. I knew I couldn't ignore it any longer. I grabbed my phone, this time dialing the HOA's emergency number. The call went to voicemail, but I wasn't giving up. I left a message, my voice shaking. Who are you people? What's going on under my house? I want answers. This has to stop. I hung up, feeling a sense of helplessness wash over me. I could feel it in the pit of my stomach, the creeping certainty that the more I dug into this, the worse it was going to get. But no matter how much I wanted to back away, I knew I couldn't. The next morning, I arrived at the HOA office in person, desperate for an explanation. The small brick building looked so ordinary, like any other suburban office, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something sinister lurked behind those walls. I walked in and was greeted by the same woman from the phone call. Her face was impassive, but her eyes, there was something in them, something that told me she knew more than she was letting on. Is there something I can help you with? She asked, her voice clipped. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my nerves. I need to know what's buried under my house. I have a right to know. Her lips curled into a tight, practiced smile. You don't have a right to dig up the land, she said, her tone icy. And you never will. I leaned in, my voice low but firm. You're not answering my question. Why is the HOA hiding this from me? What's down there? She didn't flinch, but her eyes hardened. Some things are better left alone, she said. You don't want to know, but I wasn't backing down. Tell me. For a moment, she said nothing, and I thought she might walk away. But then her voice dropped to a whisper. The land was cursed. It was never meant to be disturbed. And if you continue to dig, you won't just uncover the truth. You'll unleash it. Her words hung in the air, heavy with finality. She turned on her heel, leaving me standing there, frozen in place. I had no choice. I had to find out what they were hiding. I had to know the truth. I didn't sleep that night. My mind kept racing, replaying the conversation with the HOA, the warning, and the eerie whisper of the woman's voice in my head. You won't just uncover the truth, you'll unleash it. What did she mean by that? What was buried under my house? I had no choice. I had to find out. The next day, I returned home with a renewed determination. The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows across the yard. I stood at the foot of the stairs leading to the crawlspace entrance, the same rusted padlock still hanging from the hatch. The chill in the air seemed thicker today, heavier. It was almost as if the ground beneath my feet was watching me, waiting for me to make my move. I took a deep breath and grabbed my crowbar, knowing this was no longer just about curiosity. It was about survival. Whatever was down there had been hidden for too long. The lock came off easily, the rusted metal snapping apart with little resistance. I threw it aside, my heartbeat quickening with every second. My flashlight flickered as I shone it into the crawlspace, the beam cutting through the thick, suffocating darkness. I could smell it immediately, a sour, putrid odor that made my stomach churn. It was the scent of decay, something rotten, far beyond what was normal for a crawlspace. I crawled inside, my hands shaking as I moved deeper into the narrow space. The air grew thicker, cloying with each inch I traveled. I had never felt so uneasy in my own home, but I pressed on, my only focus the shifting shadows in the corner of my mind, the sense that I was not alone. The floor beneath me creaked as I moved. I paused, the flashlight catching a glimpse of something in the dirt, something shiny. I bent closer, heart hammering in my chest, my breath coming out in ragged gasps. The object was half buried, partially covered by dirt and dust, but its twisted shape was unmistakable. A stone. I cleared the dirt away with trembling hands, the cold rock scraping against my fingers as I unearthed it. It was not just any stone. It was carved, covered in deep, intricate symbols I didn't recognize. The markings were faint, worn down by time, but the feeling they gave me was undeniable. This was not meant to be found. I couldn't stop myself from lifting it. Something urged me to touch it, to see what lay beneath. My fingers brushed against the stone, and a sudden jolt of energy shot through me. The world around me seemed to warp, like the air itself was shifting. My skin prickled, and for the first time, I felt the full weight of the warning the HOA had given me. But it was too late. I had already uncovered it. As I moved the stone aside, a thick, dark liquid began to seep from beneath it. It was black and viscous, thick like tar, pooling around the edges. I recoiled in disgust, but my curiosity kept me rooted to the spot. Something felt off about this, like the liquid wasn't just some natural residue, but something more sinister. I hesitated, then took a deep breath. Whatever was buried here, it had to be worse than anything I could imagine. I pushed the stone aside completely, revealing a small, square box. It was old wooden, with tarnished metal corners, and it seemed to pulse with an unnatural energy. I didn't know how, but I could feel its weight, like it was alive, like it was waiting for me to open it. I hesitated. The stories in the library, the warning from the HOA, and the strange occurrences around the house all rushed back to me. But I couldn't stop now. I had to know. I pulled the box free from its resting place, and as I lifted it, the ground beneath me shuddered. It was subtle at first, just a slight tremor in the earth, but it quickly grew stronger. The entire crawlspace seemed to shift, as if the very foundation of the house was quaking. The box was cold in my hands, almost too cold, as if it had been frozen for decades. I cracked open the lid with shaking fingers, not knowing what to expect. What I saw inside made my blood run cold. There was no treasure, no relic of great value. Instead, there was a collection of bones, human bones, the remains of something or someone long forgotten. They were stacked neatly inside the box, wrapped in a rotting cloth, and there was a smell so foul, it almost made me gag. But the worst part wasn't the bones. It was the eyes. At the very bottom of the box, nestled between the bones, were two wide, glassy eyes staring back at me. They were almost human, but too large, too wrong. I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand up as they seemed to follow my every movement. Before I could react, the ground beneath me trembled violently, throwing me off balance. I collapsed onto the dirt floor, the box slipping from my hands and crashing into the ground. The tremor was growing stronger, and the air around me seemed to thicken, pulsating with a strange energy. The box had cracked open, and I saw something else, something that shouldn't have been there. The bones were moving. Slowly, but unmistakably. The eyes blinked. I scrambled to my feet, backing away, my breath coming in sharp gasps. Whatever was in that box, it wasn't dead. Not anymore. I turned to flee, but just as I reached the exit, a voice low and guttural whispered from the darkness. "You shouldn't have opened it." The voice was unmistakable. It was the same voice I had heard in the crawlspace the night before, the same one that had pleaded for help. But now it wasn't asking for help, it was threatening me. I bolted from the crawlspace, slamming the hatch shut behind me. My heart pounded in my chest as I backed away from the house, eyes darting around the yard, expecting something to emerge from the shadows. The house was alive, and it was angry. I couldn't shake the feeling. My mind raced as I paced back and forth in the living room, heart still hammering in my chest. I had barely escaped the crawlspace, but the lingering sense of being watched, the oppressive presence that had clung to me since I first uncovered the box, refused to leave. It was like something had awoken within the house, and it was now hunting me. The tremors had stopped, but the house still felt unsettled. The air was thick with an unnatural chill, and the walls creaked and groaned as if the house itself was alive, reacting to the disturbance I had caused. I could almost hear the faint echo of whispers in the distance, but when I turned, no one was there. I glanced at the clock, nearly midnight. My phone sat lifeless on the counter, no messages, no calls, nothing. I had tried calling the HOA again after what happened in the crawlspace, but no one picked up. It was as though they had vanished, as though I had been abandoned to deal with whatever horrors I had unleashed. I knew I had to do something. I couldn't keep running from this. I couldn't ignore the truth anymore. But what could I do? What was I supposed to do against something that had been buried beneath the earth for so long? Then, as if the house itself was answering me, the lights flickered. I froze, eyes wide, staring at the ceiling. The flicker was brief, But the sense of dread that followed was not. The room felt colder, darker, as though shadows were creeping along the walls, growing longer and more oppressive by the second. I turned toward the hallway, the hairs on my neck prickling. I could feel it again, the sensation of being watched. But this time, it wasn't just a feeling. It was real. Something was there, something just beyond the corner of my vision. I couldn't ignore it any longer. I had to face it. With shaky legs, I moved toward the front door, thinking that maybe, just maybe, I could leave this place behind, at least for a while. I had to get away. But when I reached for the doorknob, it wouldn't turn. The door was locked, and I could feel the weight of the house pressing down on me, as though it was keeping me inside. Panicking, I turned and ran to the back door, but it was the same. Locked. It was then that I realized. The house wasn't just alive. It was trapping me. I stumbled backward, my mind spinning, my chest tightening with panic. I wasn't alone in here, and I had no way out. The whispers began again, louder this time, more insistent. They seemed to come from every direction, all around me, crawling up my spine. They were speaking in a language I couldn't understand, but the tone, that tone, was unmistakable. It was the sound of something old, ancient, and filled with an undeniable malice. I backed into the corner of the living room, my breath shallow as I pressed myself into the wall. I couldn't understand what was happening, but the pull of the house was growing stronger, more suffocating with each passing second. That's when I saw it. A shadow, moving at the edge of my vision. I snapped my head toward it, but there was nothing there, nothing but the empty hallway. My pulse quickened. The shadow moved again, closer this time. It was longer, darker, like the shape of a person, but it didn't have a solid form. It was shifting, stretching, twisting in ways that shouldn't have been possible. I gasped, the air thick in my lungs. Whatever was in this house, whatever had been buried, wasn't just a physical presence. It was something much worse. Something that transcended what I understood to be real. My body refused to move. I was paralyzed, unable to escape the growing terror that wrapped around me like a vice. The shadow moved closer, and I saw, just for a second, the shape of a face within it. The face had no features, only two glowing hollow eyes that seemed to pierce through my soul. I tried to scream, but the sound caught in my throat. The air was thick with a pressure I couldn't escape. The house felt as though it were closing in on me, its walls pressing tighter with every breath I took. I could hear the whispers again, clearer now. They weren't just words. They were thoughts. My thoughts, but not my own. I heard them in my mind, as if the shadow were speaking directly to me, crawling through my consciousness. You opened it. You let it out. I shook my head violently, trying to force the words away, but they only grew louder, more insistent. It was never meant to be set free. Now you must pay the price. I backed away, my legs trembling beneath me. The shadow was closer now, so close that I could feel its icy breath on my skin. I reached for anything to defend myself, anything to push it away, but the room felt like it was shrinking. Every corner seemed to close in on me. I turned and ran, my feet pounding against the floor as I tried to make my way toward the stairs. But as I reached the staircase, something stopped me. A figure stood at the top of the stairs. A man, or at least, what used to be a man. His body was distorted, twisted beyond recognition, his skin cracked and decayed. His eyes, those same glowing, hollow eyes, stared down at me, unblinking. I wanted to scream. I wanted to run, to escape, but my legs wouldn't move. I was trapped in a house with no escape. The man's mouth opened, but no words came out. Instead, a guttural, unearthly growl filled the air, vibrating through my bones. It was then that I realized what the HOA had been hiding. They had buried something under my house. And whatever it wasn't human anymore. I could feel it. Whatever had been buried beneath my house, whatever I had unleashed, was closing in on me. The air was thick with an unnatural energy that seemed to pulse in time with my racing heartbeat. The house, my home, no longer felt like a sanctuary. It felt like a prison. And the shadows, the figures, they were no longer mere figments of my imagination. They were real. They were alive, and they were coming for me. I stood frozen at the foot of the staircase, my body trembling as I faced the twisted figure at the top. Its decayed form, a grotesque mockery of a human being, loomed over me. Its hollow eyes, those glowing, unnatural eyes, bore into mine as though it could see every fear, every secret I had ever held. It took a step down, and I backed away instinctively, my mind racing. I had no weapon, no way to defend myself, and yet I knew I couldn't just stand here and wait for it to consume me. Whatever this thing was, whatever it had become, it wasn't just the result of a long-forgotten curse. It was something far worse, a nightmare made flesh, a thing that had been waiting in the darkness for someone to set it free. And I had done that. I was the one who opened the box. I was the one who had triggered the release of whatever dark force had been sealed away beneath my house. And now it was hunting me. I turned and ran, my heart hammering in my chest as I bolted toward the back door once again. But when I reached it, I found it locked, just as it had been before. I pounded against the door, desperate to escape, but the wood felt like stone beneath my fists. There was no way out. The whispers came again, this time loud enough to fill my ears, to rattle my very bones. They were no longer soft, distant murmurs. They were voices, clear and distinct, echoing in the very fabric of my mind. You cannot run. You cannot hide. You opened the door. You released the curse. And now it is yours to bear. The voice was female, low and guttural, like it had been forged from the depths of the earth itself. The whispers grew louder, drowning out my thoughts, until I could no longer tell where they came from. They seemed to be everywhere at once, surrounding me, pressing in from all sides. I spun around, my eyes scanning the room in frantic desperation. But there was no escape. The walls were closing in, the air growing thicker, heavier, suffocating me. And then I saw it. The shadowy figure from the stairs had moved down into the hallway. It was closer now, its distorted limbs dragging behind it, its empty eyes fixed on me. But as it moved, the ground beneath it cracked and groaned, as though the very earth was rejecting its presence. The figures didn't seem to notice. It kept coming, one slow, deliberate step after another. I had to do something. I couldn't let it take me. I turned and ran once more, this time toward the crawlspace entrance. My hands were slick with sweat, my pulse pounding in my ears as I fumbled for the padlock. I wasn't sure what I was doing. I had no plan, no clear strategy. I was just reacting. But something inside me knew that I had to get back to that spot. I had to face whatever had been buried there. I broke the lock open with the crowbar, my hands shaking as I pulled the hatch aside. The air in the crawlspace was thick, musty, and the ground felt cold beneath my feet as I descended back into the darkness. I could hear the figure moving above me, its heavy, unnatural steps echoing through the house. But I couldn't let it stop me. I had to go back to the box. I had to find the truth, the thing that would put an end to this nightmare. The crawlspace felt like it was closing in on me again. The walls seemed to press in from all sides, the air growing suffocating, thick with a presence that wasn't my own. The whispering voices were louder here, echoing through the darkness, clawing at my mind. I reached the spot where I had unearthed the box, and there it was, still open, still cracked, the bones and the eyes staring up at me waiting. The liquid that had spilled from the box earlier had dried now, leaving behind a dark stain in the dirt. But there was something else. Something new. The shadows, the very darkness around me, seemed to bend and twist in unnatural ways, forming shapes, reaching toward me. I could feel the weight of their gaze on me, pressing down, suffocating me. It was as if the house itself were alive, feeding off the energy of the thing that had been released. I swallowed hard, my throat dry as I stepped forward. I had to end this. Whatever this was, whatever it had become, I needed to stop it now, before it consumed me completely. I reached for the box once again, my fingers brushing against the cracked wood. The moment I touched it, the room around me seemed to shudder. The very earth groaned beneath me, and the whispering voices grew louder, more insistent. It is too late. The voice was clear now, filling my mind with a dark certainty. The curse was no longer just a thing of shadows. It had become a part of me, a part of the house, and there was no turning back. But I refused to let it win. I picked up the stone once more, the one that had started it all. Its carved symbols glowed faintly beneath my fingers, and I knew, deep down, that this was the key. This was what had bound the curse to this house, to me. Without thinking, I slammed the stone into the dirt, forcing it into the earth where it had once been buried. And as I did, something shifted. The air seemed to crack, like 1,000 breaking glass shards, and the voices fell silent. The shadows froze in place, and the house seemed to exhale, releasing the breath it had been holding for so long. I stumbled backward, gasping for air, as the ground beneath me began to tremble once more. This time, however, the tremors were different. Less violent, more final, as though the house was giving up. Whatever had been awakened was being pulled back into the earth. The curse was ending. The shadow figure above me seemed to waver, its form fading, its presence dissipating. The air grew lighter, the oppressive weight lifting from my shoulders. The whispering voices faded, leaving behind only silence. I looked down at the box one last time. The bones had stopped moving. The eyes had stopped blinking. It was over.